Sometimes, the brightest stars shine the quietest. Have you ever judged someone based on their silence, assuming they had nothing to offer? In a world where loudness is often mistaken for brilliance, we tend to overlook the quiet thinkers, the ones who hide their gifts not out of fear, but because they've never been asked to show them. This is a story about Jamal Carter, a 13-year-old boy who sat unnoticed in the back of his classroom, quietly sketching complex equations in the margins of his notebook, while the world around him saw nothing more than a daydreamer. His teacher, Mrs. Amanda Thompson, believed Jamal was inattentive, disinterested, and perhaps lazy. But one day, driven by a mix of frustration and curiosity, she called him out, publicly challenging him to solve a math equation so advanced that even some adults would struggle with it. She meant to make an example out of him. What she didn't know was that Jamal Carter was a math prodigy. This single moment, where a boy stood before a classroom filled with mocking whispers and skeptical eyes, would unravel everything Mrs. Thompson believed about her students and, more importantly, herself. But this story isn't just about a hidden genius solving a complex equation. It's about how we perceive others, how easily we can misjudge, and how a simple act of recognition can change a life forever. Would you have noticed Jamal? The autumn sun stretched long golden beams across the hallways of Riverside Middle School, casting warm reflections on the linoleum floors. Outside, the trees swayed gently. Their leaves turning burnt orange and crimson, signaling the arrival of fall. Inside room 3002, however, the air was thick with tension. Students buzzed with energy, some sharing stories from the weekend, others glued to their phones, while a few hurriedly scribbled down forgotten homework before the math class officially began. The classroom, like many others, was a microcosm of adolescent society, complete with cliques, unspoken social hierarchies, and the constant undercurrent of insecurity. At the back of the room, near the window, sat Jamal Carter, a wiry 13-year-old boy with deep brown skin and thoughtful, intelligent eyes. His frame was small, his presence even smaller. He was the kind of student who mastered the art of invisibility, not because he lacked substance, but because he had learned, through bitter experience, that being noticed often came with a price. Jamal's eyes drifted out the window, his chin resting lazily on his hand. But while he appeared lost in the sway of the trees and the movement of passing cars, his mind was operating at lightning speed. Equations danced in his head. Complex algorithms, geometric patterns, and abstract formulas that most adults wouldn't comprehend. His notebook, sitting idly open on his desk, was a testament to his secret world. The assigned classwork remained untouched, but the margins were filled with intricate doodles, spiraling fractals, impossible geometry, and strings of mathematical equations that could stump even high school seniors. But no one noticed. No one ever noticed. Jamal had long given up on raising his hand in class. Years ago, he had been that kid, the one who always had the right answer, who finished his work first, and who genuinely loved learning. But enthusiasm had its cost. In third grade, after solving a complex math problem in front of the class, a group of boys began calling him Calculator Boy. They teased him for being too smart and too weird. Over time, their words grew sharper, cutting deeper until Jamal realized that it was safer to stay in the shadows. He became invisible, not to himself, but to everyone else. But his silence wasn't apathy. It was survival. Unbeknownst to Jamal, this particular math class wasn't just another mundane period in his school day. Riverside Middle School had recently been chosen to participate in a district-wide talent search for gifted students, focusing on underrepresented minorities in STEM fields. A prestigious scholarship was up for grabs, one that could change a student's life forever. The catch: the scholarship would be awarded based on teacher recommendations and observed classroom performance. No applications. No standardized tests. Teachers were to nominate students who demonstrated untapped potential. Mrs. Amanda Thompson, the math teacher, had been instructed to keep the program secret to ensure the selection process was based on genuine talent, not rehearsed performances. But this added pressure weighed heavily on her. Mrs. Thompson was a veteran teacher, known for her high standards and strict demeanor. Her sharp features and tailored blazers gave her an air of authority, and her booming voice often left students scrambling to obey. Yet beneath her polished exterior lay a woman grappling with insecurities of her own. She had been passed over twice for a promotion to assistant principal, each time told she lacked the personal touch needed for leadership. Though she projected confidence, the feedback gnawed at her. This scholarship program felt like a second chance to prove she could spot and nurture talent. But so far, none of her students have impressed her. She scanned the classroom, her eyes landing on familiar faces. The class clown, the overachiever, the struggling student. None of them seemed like scholarship material. Then her eyes flicked to the back of the room. Jamal Carter, the quiet one. Her brow furrowed. She had seen his test scores. Perfect every time. Yet in class, he was disengaged, distant. A contradiction she couldn't wrap her head around. Is he really that smart? Or is he just good at memorizing? She wondered. Her frustration grew. She needed to find a candidate for the scholarship, and the deadline was looming. Across the room, Derek Malone, the self-proclaimed class alpha, noticed Mrs. Thompson's lingering stare at Jamal. Derek was the classic school bully, tall for his age, confident to a fault, and constantly needing to assert dominance. He had targeted Jamal before, mostly with subtle jabs, mocking his quietness, calling him space case whenever he drifted into thought. But today, Derek had something more malicious in mind. He'd overheard Mrs. Thompson speaking to another teacher about the scholarship, though he didn't catch all the details. What he did understand was that the teachers were looking for smart kids. If Jamal's the one she's watching, Derek thought, I'll make sure that ends today. As the bell rang, Mrs. Thompson clapped her hands. All right, class, settle down. She began the lesson, but found her eyes repeatedly drawn to Jamal, who was once again staring out the window, seemingly oblivious to the world. That's it, she thought. If he's as smart as his tests say, it's time he proves it. But before she could act, Derek raised his hand. Yes, Derek. Mrs. Thompson, he said, feigning innocence. I was wondering if we could do one of those. You know, whiteboard challenges, like call someone up to solve a problem in front of the class. The room buzzed with interest. Mrs. Thompson hesitated. She didn't want to encourage public embarrassment, but the idea sparked something in her. All right, she said, grabbing a marker. Let's do it. Derek smirked and shot a glance at Jamal. I think Jamal should go first, he said. A wave of whispers and stifled giggles spread through the class. Jamal's heart sank. His worst nightmare was unfolding. Mrs. Thompson, still conflicted, finally spoke. Jamal, up front, please. Jamal froze. His throat tightened as he felt dozens of eyes on him. Slowly, he stood, his legs shaky. The room went silent. "Come on," Derek muttered, loud enough for nearby students to hear. "Let's see the genius." Mrs. Thompson scrawled an equation on the board, a complex one more advanced than the class had seen, but solvable. "Take your time," she said, handing Jamal the marker. The room was silent, except for the faint sound of a ticking clock. Jamal stared at the board. His palms were sweaty. His heart raced. He could feel the judgment in the room, the expectation that he would fail. But then something shifted. He remembered the pages of his notebook, filled with problems far more difficult than this one. He realized that this moment, this terrifying, humiliating moment, was also an opportunity. No more hiding, he thought. He picked up the marker and began to write. As the marker scratched against the whiteboard, the class waited, breaths held. Would Jamal crumble under pressure, or would he reveal the genius that had remained hidden for so long? But what no one, not even Jamal, knew was that this moment was about to trigger a chain of events that would change everything. For Jamal, for Mrs. Thompson, even for Derek, secrets would unravel. Friendships would fracture. The classroom's hum faded into a tense stillness as Jamal stood before the whiteboard, marker in hand. The complex equation loomed before him, its tangled mess of variables and exponents, mocking him in silence. Sweat beaded on his brow. But inside, a war waged. A battle between the crippling fear of humiliation and the deep, hidden reservoir of brilliance that had gone unnoticed for so long. As he hesitated, a mocking voice pierced the stillness. "Bet he doesn't even know where to start," Derek Malone sneered from the back, his voice dripping with smugness. Jamal's fingers tightened around the marker. "They expect me to fail." But failure wasn't new, or rather, the expectation of it wasn't. It had followed him through every classroom, every group project, and even beyond the school walls. He had learned long ago that in most people's eyes, a quiet black boy sitting at the back of the class was easy to overlook, or worse, easy to label. But that expectation had also given him a secret weapon, invisibility. And within that invisibility, he had built a world filled with numbers, patterns, and logic. A sanctuary where equations didn't judge and where mistakes were simply steps toward answers. And now, it was time to open the door to that world. He pressed the marker to the board. The first lines were shaky. His hand trembled as he wrote, breaking down the complex equation into manageable parts. His brain kicked into overdrive, mapping out multiple solution pathways, each branching into intricate webs of possibilities. But the deeper he delved into the problem, the less he noticed the classroom around him. The murmurs faded. The stifled giggles became distant echoes. It was just him and the math. In this moment, Jamal wasn't just solving an equation. He was dismantling it, seeing through its facade to the elegant logic beneath. He isolated the variables, simplified the fractions, and methodically worked his way to the solution, each stroke of the marker revealing the depth of his understanding. But just as the room began to realize that Jamal was actually solving the problem, Derek Malone's smirk twisted into a frown. This wasn't supposed to happen. He glanced at his friend, Tyler, who sat next to him. "We can't let him pull this off," Derek whispered. Tyler raised an eyebrow. "What are you gonna do?" Derek pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of Jamal's work in progress. Then, with a few taps, he sent it to a group chat filled with other students. The message read, "Guess who's been cheating? No way he's doing this on his own. Gotta be a scam." Almost instantly, the group chat exploded with responses. No way he's that smart. Betty found the answer online. Let's call him out. Derek knew that even if Jamal solved the equation perfectly, the rumor would taint the victory, because sometimes whispers were more powerful than facts. Jamal capped the marker and stepped back, revealing the fully solved equation. The class sat in stunned silence, jaws slack, eyes wide. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward, scanning his work. Her sharp eyes moved line by line, expecting, hoping to find a mistake. But there were none. Her heart raced as the realization hit. He solved it. This is correct, she said, her voice quiet but filled with awe. The class erupted into applause. Students who had mocked him seconds ago now clapped and cheered, their faces filled with a mix of surprise and admiration. But the applause was short-lived. A student's voice cut through the celebration. Yeah, but did he really solve it himself? Heads turned toward Derek, who stood with his phone raised high, the group chat open for everyone to see. Look, he said, smirking. Half the school's already saying he cheated. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Jamal's victory crumbled in an instant. Mrs. Thompson's eyes darted between Jamal and Derek. She wanted to defend Jamal. She wanted to believe that what she had just witnessed was real. But doubt crept in. What if he did cheat? What if I was wrong about him? Her hesitation was palpable. Jamal, she began cautiously, can you explain your process? Walk us through how you solved it? Jamal's heart sank. Even Mrs. Thompson didn't believe him. He stepped back to the board, trying to suppress the lump in his throat. With shaky hands, he began to explain each step, the logic, the shortcuts, the methods he used. But the more he spoke, the clearer it became. His understanding was deep, intricate, and authentic. His explanations weren't memorized. They were born from genuine comprehension. Mrs. Thompson's doubt melted away, replaced with shame. She had almost let a whisper of suspicion override undeniable truth. She turned to Derek, her voice hard. That's enough. You don't need to tear others down to feel better about yourself. Derek's smugness faltered, but his ego burned. This isn't over, he muttered under his breath. After class, Mrs. Thompson pulled Jamal aside. I'm sorry I doubted you, she said, her voice softer. You have a gift, Jamal. Jamal looked down at his shoes, unsure how to respond. Do your parents know how talented you are? She asked. Jamal hesitated, his hands clenched into fists. My mom, yeah, but my dad, he stopped mid-sentence, his voice trembling. Mrs. Thompson waited, sensing something deeper. Jamal finally whispered, my dad left when I was 6. He was a math professor. He used to teach me equations at the kitchen table. But after he left, I kept going. It was the only thing that still felt like him. Mrs. Thompson's heart broke. This wasn't just about math for Jamal. It was about connection, loss, and holding on to a fragment of someone who was gone. But as Jamal packed his things and left the classroom, he noticed Derek and Tyler huddled together, their eyes filled with mischief. The rumor of Jamal's cheating was spreading fast. And even though he had proven himself in class, the whispers outside the room were growing louder. And somewhere deep inside, Jamal knew this battle wasn't over. He wasn't just fighting for recognition now. He was fighting to clear his name. The hum of excitement that had filled the classroom after Jamal's stunning display of brilliance evaporated the moment Derek's accusation echoed through the hallways. By the time the lunch bell rang, whispers and rumors had spread like wildfire. "Did you hear? Jamal faked that whole math thing." "Yeah, they say he had the answer on his phone or something." "I knew it was too good to be true." Jamal walked the crowded hallway with his shoulders hunched, his notebook clutched tightly to his chest. The same students who had clapped for him hours earlier now avoided his gaze or exchanged mocking smirks behind his back. His chest felt heavy with the crushing weight of injustice. Despite proving his skills in front of the class, it wasn't enough. One rumor, a single spark of doubt, had set his world on fire. By the end of the day, Riverside Middle was split into two camps. The doubters. Led by Derek Malone, this group spread the narrative that Jamal had cheated, insisting that a nobody like him couldn't possibly solve such a complex problem. They fueled their claims with photos Derek had taken, suggesting Jamal had been looking at his phone earlier in class, even though he hadn't. The believers, a smaller, quieter group who had witnessed Jamal's brilliance firsthand and believed in his talent. They defended him in hushed voices, but were outnumbered. The tension was palpable. For Jamal, the worst part wasn't the bullying. It was the isolation. He had spent so much of his life blending into the background, and now that he had finally been seen, it was for all the wrong reasons. During lunch, Jamal sat alone in the farthest corner of the cafeteria, his tray untouched. He traced the edges of his notebook, a familiar comfort, but even the pages that once brought him peace now felt tainted. Maybe I should just stayed invisible, he thought. But as he stared at the blank pages, he remembered his mother's words from the night before. "You have something special, Jamal. Don't hide it. The world needs people like you." Those words were supposed to be empowering, but now they felt like a cruel joke. Just as he was about to leave the cafeteria, someone sat down across from him. It was Mrs. Helen Rivera, the school's guidance counselor. She was in her early 30s, with soft eyes and a calming presence. Known for her compassionate approach, Mrs. Rivera often worked with students who felt overlooked. "Hey, Jamal," she said gently. "Mind if I sit?" He shrugged, unsure of what to say. "I heard what happened in math class," she continued, "and I also heard about the rumors." Jamal's stomach twisted. "I didn't cheat," he mumbled. "I know," she replied without hesitation. "I've seen you doodling equations in your notebook during lunch. I always wondered how advanced they were." This caught him off guard. Someone had noticed, even when he thought no one was watching. "There's a math competition coming up," she said, sliding a flyer across the table. "It's open to the entire district. No phones, no help. Just students, their minds, and the problems. It could be a chance to prove to everyone what you can really do." Jamal's hands trembled as he picked up the flyer. It was an intimidating idea. Public competitions terrified him, but this was also an opportunity to fight back, not with words, but with the one thing no one could take from him, his brilliance. But news of the competition spread fast. When Derek Malone found out that Jamal was planning to compete, his rage flared. "He's really going to try to act like a genius now," Derek spat to his friends. "We can't let that happen." He hatched a plan, not only to sabotage Jamal's chance at redemption, but to humiliate him publicly during the competition. What Derek didn't know was that Mrs. Thompson had overheard his conversation. Mrs. Thompson had spent the last 24 hours reflecting deeply on her own actions. She had doubted Jamal when he needed her most, and now she saw the cost of that doubt spreading like a virus through the school. She thought about her role as a teacher, not just to teach math, but to recognize and nurture potential. I need to fix this, she thought. That evening, she called Jamal's mother, Monica Carter. Mrs. Carter, I need to apologize, she began. I misjudged Jamal, but I want to help make this right. There's a math competition, and I'd like to coach him for it. On the other end of the line, Monica was silent for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. Jamal's been waiting his whole life for someone to believe in him, she finally said. Thank you. For the next 2 weeks, Jamal stayed after school every day, working with Mrs. Thompson. She pushed him hard, but for the first time, it wasn't to expose his weaknesses. It was to strengthen his strengths. They worked on problem-solving techniques, time management, and handling the pressure of performing in front of others. Jamal's confidence grew, but so did his anxiety. The fear of public failure loomed large. You're not doing this for them, Mrs. Thompson reminded him one afternoon. You're doing this for you, to prove to yourself that you deserve to be seen. The night before the competition, Jamal sat at his kitchen table, his notebook open but untouched. His mother sat across from him, watching his nervous fidgeting. Jamal, she said softly, I'm proud of you, no matter what happens tomorrow. But what if I mess up? He asked, his voice cracking. What if they're right about me? His mother reached across the table and placed her hand over his. You're more than just what people think of you. Win or lose, your brilliance is real. It's time the world sees it. Jamal nodded, swallowing his fear. He knew one thing for certain. He'd come too far to back down now. The air in Riverside Middle School buzzed with a strange mix of anticipation and tension. Flyers advertising the Tri-County Math Challenge were plastered across the hallways, each one a stark reminder of the battle Jamal was about to face. Jamal woke up that morning with a knot in his stomach. He sat at the kitchen table, nervously pushing scrambled eggs around his plate. His mother, Monica Carter, tried to ease his nerves. You've worked so hard for this, Jamal, she said softly. No one can take that away from you. But Jamal's mind was racing. What if I mess up? What if Derek pulls something today? What if I'm not good enough? Despite his mother's encouragement, the pressure was suffocating. The Tri-County Math Challenge was being held in the grand auditorium of Lincoln High, the largest school in the district. Rows of chairs stretched across the hall, filled with parents, teachers, and students from various schools. The stage was set with long tables, each spaced apart, with nothing but pencils, erasers, and stacks of paper. No phones, no notes, no distractions. It was just the competitors and their minds. Jamal's heart pounded as he took his seat. To his right sat students from prestigious schools, polished, confident, and clearly used to competitions like this. To his left, however, sat Derek Malone. Wait, Derek's competing? Jamal's stomach twisted. He hadn't expected Derek to sign up. Derek leaned over and whispered, Oh, did I not tell you? Thought I'd join the fun. Hope you're ready to lose? Or maybe you'll cheat again? Jamal's fists clenched beneath the table. What Jamal didn't know was that Derek had orchestrated a sabotage plan. Earlier that morning, Derek had snuck into the auditorium during setup. He tampered with Jamal's test packet, replacing some of the pages with incomplete, unsolvable problems. If Jamal couldn't finish, it would look like he had lied about his skills. He'll choke on stage and everyone will see he's a fraud, Derek thought. But there was one flaw in Derek's plan. Mrs. Thompson. While the competition was about to begin, Mrs. Amanda Thompson arrived at the auditorium. She had spent the past 2 weeks coaching Jamal, watching him grow, not just as a mathematician, but as a person willing to stand up for himself. As she entered the hall, she noticed Derek whispering to another student in the corner, looking smug. Her instincts kicked in. She walked straight to the head judge of the competition, Mr. Reynolds, and asked to inspect Jamal's test packet before the event began. "What are you suggesting, Mrs. Thompson?" Mr. Reynolds asked, raising an eyebrow. "I believe one of my students might try to sabotage another," she said firmly, "and I can't let that happen." Together, they opened Jamal's test packet backstage and discovered the altered pages, unsolvable problems meant to trip him up. Mr. Reynolds' face hardened. "This is serious." Mrs. Thompson nodded. "I'll handle it." She had the packet replaced with a fresh, correct one, ensuring Jamal had a fair chance. The moderator took the stage. "Welcome to the Tri-County Math Challenge. Competitors, you'll have 2 hours to solve 5 complex problems. No calculators. No phones. Just pure brain power." Jamal took a deep breath as the timer began. The first problem was tough, but manageable. His pencil scratched across the page as he worked through variables, isolating terms, and simplifying fractions. But then, from the corner of his eye, he saw Derek. Derek wasn't working. He was watching Jamal, smirking. Halfway through the competition, Derek accidentally dropped his pencil, causing a loud clatter. The distraction broke Jamal's focus. "Oops," Derek whispered with a grin. But Jamal closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and refocused. He wasn't going to let Derek win. Just as the competitors were nearing the end, the moderator made an unexpected announcement. For the final question, we're introducing a wildcard problem, one so complex that it's never been solved at the middle school level. It's optional, but solving it correctly will guarantee a win. Gasps rippled through the audience. Jamal's hands trembled as the new problem was handed out. The equation sprawled across the page, filled with advanced calculus concepts that most students wouldn't even understand. He looked at it, and something sparked inside him. Jamal dove into the problem. His mind buzzed with possibilities. For the first time, he didn't feel the weight of the crowd or the pressure of expectations. It was just him and the numbers. He visualized the patterns, broke down the problem into smaller parts, and applied concepts he had taught himself from old library books. Sweat dripped down his forehead as the timer ticked down. With 10 seconds left, he wrote the final answer, boxed it, and slammed his pencil down. "Time's up." The moderator collected the papers. Jamal sat back in his chair, his heart racing, unsure if he had done enough. As the judges reviewed the papers, murmurs filled the room. Mr. Reynolds approached the stage. "We have our results." The room fell silent. In third place, Sarangayan from Lincoln High. In second place, Derek Malone from Riverside Middle. Derek stood up, feigning pride, but his eyes darted nervously toward Jamal. And in first place, with a perfect score, including solving the wildcard problem, the auditorium erupted into applause. Jamal's vision blurred with tears as he stood, overwhelmed with emotion. But then, Mr. Reynolds continued, "We also need to address a serious matter. We discovered that someone attempted to sabotage Jamal's test packet before the competition. Thanks to Mrs. Thompson, the sabotage was caught in time." Gasps echoed through the crowd. And after reviewing security footage, Mr. Reynolds said, "We confirmed that Derek Malone was responsible." The room fell into stunned silence. Derek's face turned pale. Teachers escorted him out as whispers swirled through the audience. Jamal stood on stage, clutching the first-place trophy. But it wasn't the trophy that mattered. It was the validation. Mrs. Thompson walked up to him. "I'm proud of you, Jamal. Not just for winning, but for never giving up." Jamal's mother rushed onto the stage, hugging him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You did it, baby. You showed them who you really are." For the first time in his life, Jamal felt fully seen. Not as the quiet kid at the back of the class, not as the boy who kept his brilliance hidden, but as someone who had fought for his place and earned it. As the crowd cheered, a man in a sharp suit approached Mrs. Thompson. He handed her a business card. "I'm with the National Academy of Mathematics," he said. "We're always looking for young talent. Jamal has a bright future ahead. We'd like to offer him a full scholarship to our summer program." Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened, and she turned to Jamal. "You're about to go places you never imagined." Jamal looked at the card, his mind buzzing with possibilities. For the first time, the future felt wide open. The sunlight filtered through the curtains of Jamal's modest room, illuminating the pages of his well-worn notebook still open on his desk. His trophy from the Tri-County Math Challenge now stood proudly beside it, a symbol of everything he had endured and overcome. Jamal sat on his bed, clutching the business card from the National Academy of Mathematics, his mind swirling with emotions, pride, disbelief, and a tinge of fear. "Is this really happening?" he thought. His mother, Monica Carter, peeked her head through the door. "Jamal, breakfast's ready." He looked up, his eyes reflecting the weight of the moment. "Mom, they want me to go to the academy this summer." She walked in, her face beaming with pride, but also layered with concern. "That's an amazing opportunity, Jamal," she said, sitting beside him. "But it's okay to be scared. New places, new people. It's a big step." He hesitated. "What if I don't fit in there? What if I'm not good enough?" Monica cupped his face gently. "You've already proven how brilliant you are. And not just to them, to yourself. You belong anywhere you want to be." Meanwhile, across town, Derek Malone sat in the principal's office, his head bowed low. His father, Mr. Malone, a stern man with high expectations, stood beside him with arms crossed, disappointment radiating from his posture. The principal, Mrs. Evans, slid a paper across the desk. "Derek, what you did was unacceptable. Cheating and sabotage are serious offenses." Derek kept his gaze down. "We're suspending you for 2 weeks and removing you from the student council. But," she paused, her voice softening, "there's another option." Derek looked up, surprised. "We've arranged a mentorship program. You'll spend time after school helping tutor younger students struggling with math." Derek's face twisted in confusion. "You want me to tutor? After what I did?" Mrs. Evans nodded. "You're not a bad student, Derek, but you've been more focused on tearing others down than lifting yourself up. This is your chance to make amends." Derek swallowed hard, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. Later that afternoon, as Jamal was leaving school, he noticed Derek sitting alone on the steps, staring at the ground. Their eyes met. For a moment, Jamal considered walking past. After everything Derek had done, the rumors, the sabotage, he had every right to. but something stopped him. He walked over. "Hey," Jamal said. Derek glanced up, guilt written across his face. I'm sorry," Derek mumbled, the words foreign in his mouth, "for everything. The rumors, the competition. I don't know. I didn't want you to win." Jamal nodded, the tension between them thick. "Why, though?" he asked softly. Derek hesitated. "Because I've always been the smart one. It's like the only thing I had going for me. And then you showed up, quiet, in the back of the class, and solved that problem like it was nothing. I got scared." Jamal's chest tightened. For so long, he had seen Derek as a bully, but now he saw something else, someone struggling with his own insecurities. "I get it," Jamal replied, "but you didn't have to tear me down." Derek sighed. "I know. I'm starting that tutoring thing Mrs. Evans set up. Maybe I can make things right." Jamal offered a small smile. "Good. You're better than what you did." They sat in silence for a moment before Jamal stood to leave. "See you around, Derek." Back in room 3002, Mrs. Thompson sat at her desk, reflecting on the past few weeks. Her classroom felt different now, less rigid, more open. Jamal's journey had changed not just him, but her too. She remembered how she had nearly crushed his spirit with her doubts. But watching him rise, despite the obstacles, reminded her why she became a teacher in the first place. She glanced around the room as students filed in. Some were chatting, others doodling. But this time, instead of launching straight into the lesson, she stood up and spoke. "Before we start today," she began, "I want to say something." The room quieted. "I've been your teacher for a long time, and I've always prided myself on pushing students to be their best. But recently, I realized something. I wasn't always looking closely enough. I missed the quiet talents, the ones who don't always raise their hands but still have incredible minds." She looked at Jamal, who sat near the front now, notebook open, no longer hiding in the back. "We all have something special inside us, and it's my job to help you find it." The class sat in stunned silence before a round of applause broke out. For the first time, room 3002 felt like a place where everyone belonged. A week later, Jamal received a thick envelope from the National Academy of Mathematics. He tore it open, his heart racing. Inside was an acceptance letter, official, stamped, and filled with details about the summer program. But there was more. Enclosed was a personal handwritten note from the Academy's director. "Jamal, your talent isn't just in your ability to solve equations. It's in your resilience, your passion, and your heart. We look forward to seeing where your brilliance will take you." Jamal held the letter close, tears welling in his eyes. On the last day of school, Mrs. Rivera, the guidance counselor, pulled Jamal aside. "I wanted to show you something," she said, handing him a folder. Inside were scholarship opportunities, advanced programs, and mentorships in STEM fields. "This is just the beginning," she smiled. "You have a future full of possibilities." Jamal's heart swelled. For so long, he had felt invisible, lost in the background. But now, the world has opened its doors. He looked up at Mrs. Rivera. "I'm ready." As the school year ended, whispers about Jamal's journey echoed through the halls, not as rumors, but as inspiration. Other students who had once sat in silence began to speak up. More teachers looked beyond surface level behaviors, searching for hidden talents. And in room 3002, a new tradition began. Every month, students would solve a wildcard equation on the board, just like Jamal had, not as a way to embarrass, but to celebrate creativity and bravery. And above the whiteboard, a plaque read, "To those who dare to be seen." Jamal Carter had become more than the quiet kid in the back. He was a symbol of resilience, brilliance, and the power of never giving up. Jamal's story isn't just about math. It's about the hidden potential in every one of us. How many Jamal Carters are sitting in classrooms, offices, or even on park benches? Brilliant minds waiting to be seen. This story reminds us that kindness, patience, and belief can unlock worlds of possibilities. So the next time you see someone sitting quietly in back, lost in thought, ask yourself, what brilliance might they be hiding? If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a little reminder of their worth. Let's continue celebrating the hidden brilliance in all of us.